Hi, Paul.
Hello, Tom. How are you?
And even though it's up early, you're dressed so much better than I am. I'm here in this T-shirt.
Come on, this is radio. You could be wearing a tuxedo right now.
Right.
Don't give yourself up.
But I appreciate the three-piece. It's
you
look great.
My uniform.
What is your all-time favorite sketch?
Oh gosh, it was from an SNL episode. It was Kristen Wiig and Tracy Morgan, and it was called Rocket Dog. I think it was called Rocket, and it was about. But he was this producer who had made this movie called Rocket Dog, and so they kept showing clips. But at the end of every clip, there was an in memoriam reel of the people that were in the thing, and you just kept learning more and more people died when they made this movie. And it's the funniest sketch I think ever. Second only to there's a Monty Python sketch where they're on a lifeboat. But they have to keep restarting it because people keep messing up their lines, and then it's about how they're going to have to eat somebody's leg because they have no food. But then the end, they're like, "Oh, good, we're going to eat his leg. Oh, we can have all these vegetables with it." And they have all these canned vegetables on it. So, I love that stuff.
As a comedy director, do you think you have a different perspective on what makes a sketch work? Are you able to watch the SNL and go, "I get what they did there"?
Yeah, totally. I mean, there's different. All comedy has its own kind of structure, and movies have a very specific structure. And then sketches have various structures that work, and there's, some that are kind of the structure of repetition. Those are, can be funny sometimes. The kind of same thing keeps happening. It just gets more absurd the more you hear it. Then there's my favorite ones are the ones that kind of start going one way and then they fold in on themselves, and by the end they almost negate what they were about. That lifeboat one being the perfect example. It's all about we have no food, we have to eat this guy, and it turns out it's all about just wanting to eat a guy's leg, and they actually had food. So I find that very anarchistic and funny.
Last night I found myself on YouTube preparing for this, watching some of my favorite sketches, and I watched Toonces the Cat Who Could Drive a Car.
Always funny.
About 11 times, and it's funny every single time. And there's something about that repetition. There's something about you kind of know what's going to happen,
right? And
there's no way out of it, but that's still funny for some reason.
Yeah, because you just love what you know they're going to go off a cliff at some point. Something's going to go terribly wrong. No, I love that stuff. Yeah, they're just talking about funny stuff. Like, did you see Anchorman 2?
Yeah.
Just the comedy of inevitability is so funny because when they're in that RV and it's driving, and you realize that Paul Rudd isn't driving it anymore because it's on autopilot. But what they set up is somebody's got a deep fryer, and they've got like a pile of bowling balls, and so you just know it's coming, and that's what's so funny too. Is just like, okay, it's eventually, and then the payoff is so funny because all this slow motion of them getting hit with bowling balls, burning fryer oil on themselves.
But I'm thinking about like a lot of the actors that you have worked with in your films have a sketch background. They started out at Second City, or they started out in improv in some kind of way. Yeah. Especially when it comes to The Heat, especially when it comes to Ghostbusters and Bridesmaids. What is it about sketch comedians that makes them special to you?
Well, because they're well-versed in improv, and the best ones are great actors, but they're also able to think on their feet. And when you do improv and sketch comedy, you have to establish a personality very quickly, and you have to bring something extra to a character, because sketch comedy is very much like it's like a concentrate, like comedy concentrate.
Right.
So you have to have characters that really make a statement, that are extreme characters sometimes, but they still have to be believable. I mean, you can be a little more absurd in sketches, but I have a hatred of comedy that is the performers are going like, look at how dumb this guy is, or I don't believe this person exists. Because then you're just then we're all in on the joke, but there's no reality to it.
That kind of postmodern, late 80s kind of comedy.
Exactly. That's exactly it. And I kind of suffered through that period because I was trying to get comedy made, and I was an actor at the time and a stand-up and all that, and that was sort of the thing. There was much more kind of like, oh, look how funny we are. And it's just like, yeah, okay, that is funny, but to me, I much prefer, that's why I loved working on The Office. I mean, that was where I felt that was when the change happened, where we started to get away from big, broad comedy. And I think a lot of it's because of YouTube, because the things we were watching on YouTube and finding so funny were actual videos that happened to people and mishaps and all that. And so it became much more subtle and real.
I think that one of the hallmarks of you and your kind of generation of comedy writers and comedy directors is that you allow actors more than any other generation to improvise within a film.
Yeah.
And oftentimes we'll see these they're great for people like me, and people like us that say stuff, oh, did you know that great scene is improvised? I mean, is this the kind of thing that you can only kind of trust experienced sketch comedians to do.
Yeah, 'cause it's always dangerous. I mean, there's some actors I've worked with who are great at it, like Rose Byrne, for example. She's not an improv person, but she finds this character and becomes it so entirely, and she knows its foibles so well that then she's just able to interact as that character. And she's naturally funny because that character has a very odd take on the world, whether it's clueless or it's mean or whatever. And that to me is sort of nirvana. But in general, when you get people, and the dirtiest word for us in comedy is when we say something sweaty.
What does that mean?
It means that you see them working so hard. Either the joke's working hard, the actor working hard, you go like, oh my God, that's so sweaty. It's trying so hard for a laugh. And that's when you pull back. But that's also why comedy doesn't win awards. Like we, very seldom ever win, Oscars and that kind of thing. Because when you do a comedy right, it looks easy.
Right.
It has to look effortless. If you see it working, it's sweaty, and then it's terrible.
I do have to ask the question that I'm sure you get a fair bit. Where did you get that tie? No, it's any particular scenes come to mind of great improv scenes, things that weren't scripted, things that you didn't write?
Oh, in my movies, gosh, there's so many. So many of the funniest lines kind of happen in the moment. In Spy, there's a really interesting scene where Rose Byrne's character figures out that Melissa's character is a spy, and Melissa has to think on her feet and turn it. And it was all scripted out, and it was great. But then, Melissa would she headed into this line. I can't even say it because it's filled with F-bombs and all that. But she's so funny because she's in the scene. It's a very dramatic scene, trying to convince this woman that she's. Oops, I hit my mic. That's an improv thing.
There it is. Yeah,
there you go.
Yeah.
Unscripted. She had to convince her that deconstruct her personality-wise and say you're doing this because your father never loved you and you were trying to prove yourself to your father. But then she turns it on her and saying, how dare you say I look like your mother? This picture of her mother, which is really ugly. She said they look the same. But then Melissa did this line, which you can look up in the movie. And the funny thing about Melissa is she'll start what I know is going to be the funniest joke ever, but it's super mean. And she'll get halfway into it and she'll go like, oh, I can't do that. And I'm always like, do it right now. You could say it. You got to say it. It's going to be the funniest thing. And then she'll say it, and it's just hilarious. So it was all about, basically about, I can't say it. Drop the mic, and if you F that monster, then you have to drop the mic and walk out.
I think we could put it on YouTube. I think I'm getting a nod here from our friend Steve.
Yeah.
I think we could put it on
But that was
on
completely
YouTube.
improvised, and it just makes me laugh so hard.
I want to talk about Melissa a little bit later, but I know you did a lot of stand-up, but I don't think you did much sketch yourself. Is that right?
No, I did a lot of sketch.
Is that so?
I did a lot. I had an improv group, a failed improv group, back in the '80s, because I took classes. I took a class at the Groundlings, and then went like, well, why am I paying to do this? I should just start my own troupe. And so started a troupe at a bowling alley out in Simi Valley, California, which is way outside of L.A.
Right.
And I was able to get this time in this club because it was on at 8, we had the 8 o'clock to 9 o'clock spot on Thursday, which is right when the Cosby Show was the biggest show on TV. So we performed to no one basically every week. But I loved doing improv. It's my favorite thing.
And then you end up. I want to touch a little bit on work you did about 15 years ago. You created this show called Freaks and Geeks, which is, at least to me, an incredibly important show, and I think to a lot of people, a very important show. Judd Apatow was the executive producer. I think I've watched it 5 or 6 times, at least. But it was also a major change in your career. I was looking at your IMDb, and it's a lot of acting roles up until Freaks and Geeks, and then it feels like the column changes. It goes from Paul Feig actor to Paul Feig director, writer. What changed with Freaks and Geeks?
Well, that was the major turning point, because I was an actor. I was on all these, I did really well. I was a character actor, made my living, really good living at it for about 15 years, and I would always be like the 6th or 7th lead on a network TV show, but it would always get canceled after the first season. And this happened with 4 other series, and then so the 5th series, I finally got on this thing called Sabrina the Teenage Witch. Yeah, where I played Mr. Poole, the science teacher, and finally it was a hit show. So I was like, finally, as an actor, you just want to be taken care of.
Sorry, I just put that together too.
Yeah,
as someone who watched Sabrina the Teenage Witch.
Well, there you go.
I think I just put that together.
Here I am.
I don't think I can continue on. I think
Mr. Poole.
I'm a little.
Mitosis is. That's what one of my catchphrases on
I'm a little intimidated right now.
Yeah, you should be.
So anyway, go on. Sorry, I hate to say. So you do Sabrina, and then
so I did that, and then I wrote this movie, low budget movie that I said I'm going to take my money for my first year of working on Sabrina. I'm going to put it all into this movie. And so made this $30,000 film that I wrote here in Toronto, by the way. I wrote it when I was staying at Bruce McCullough's house, and I wrote this movie and shot it. And was very excited about it. And then as I was editing it, I got a call from the showrunner of Sabrina saying that they were basically firing me from the show, writing me out. So then, but I knew I'd been wanting to make the transition. I always wanted to be Woody Allen, so I wanted to write, direct, and star in my own things. And I went to USC Film School. So I was always angling to become a director too, but this kicked me out of the nest.
Right.
And so when I was out on the road trying to promote this movie for a year and trying to get it into festivals, I wrote Freaks and Geeks just as a spec script. Normally back then you'd sell an idea to a network, and then you'd do development where they'd give you notes, and it would do this process. It would water it down. So I just wrote this as a spec thing, and then sold it, and we got it made. And that was when I said, like, okay, I'm done with acting. I'm going to do this now.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I just in talking about Freaks and Geeks, I mentioned that it's this crazy important show to me, and I think to a lot of people like me, it's a very, very important show. And again, if you haven't seen it, I think it's on Netflix. You can you can watch it, but
you can stream it.
It was canceled just after 12 episodes aired, which to me is kind of baffling. But I could only imagine what it was like for you to have this project that you kind of believed in, that, like you said, this big writing moment for you, this big creative moment, this story you really wanted to tell. What was it like, not now, but in that moment?
Oh, it was very weird. I mean, you never go on any project not thinking people aren't going to just love it and it's going to be the biggest project ever of all time. So, here we had this show. We were very excited. Got picked up to series, so we're celebrating. But it was that even the moment one, they say, like, you're picked up. Oh, yay. And you're going to be on at 8 o'clock Saturday night. Oh, what? Boo. And this is back, before, a lot of DVRs and that kind of thing. And we just, you kind of lived and died on when your audience was home. And we're like, nobody who would watch this show is going to be home at 8 o'clock on Saturday night. And so then add to that, first episode airs, we got amazing reviews. So actually our ratings were pretty good that first night. But I think it was the kind of thing where people go like, oh, let's stay at home and watch that show. And then it's like, hey, cool, next time I don't have anything to do on Saturday night, I'll watch it again. So the next week our ratings just go in the toilet.
Right.
And then they pull us off the air after 2 airings for 4 weeks because of the World Series. So then we had to start again. I think we were on for 4 weeks, and then they pulled us off because our ratings were low and held us off the air for 2 months, and then put us back on the air on a Monday night at 8 o'clock, but up against Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, which was the biggest show on television. I mean, it was like a phenomenon.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so we just got killed. And so we were always the lowest rated show, usually the lowest rated show on NBC. So it's very hard for me to kind of get mad at them for canceling us because we were, losing the money.
But were you surprised years later when it became this touchstone, when it became this incredibly important show to a lot of people?
I was thrilled. I mean, that's, any project you do, you hope it will live on. But this was always the thing about television is like, if you weren't a hit, especially back then, you would go away because they weren't even bringing out shows on DVD. Like, once the show was gone, it was gone. And then basically for 4 years, it was that kind of thing where you go like, yeah, hey, I heard that show was really good. And nobody sees it. It wasn't until we got it on DVD 4 years later, which we could have done earlier. But everybody who wanted to put it out didn't want to pay for the music rights. So they wanted
there's incredible music in it.
Yeah, and they want to replace the music. And it's like, you can't do that. The music, these songs are as important to these stories as the characters are. So finally, Shout Factory stepped up and paid for the music. And then it's so great that now it kind of lives on.
Earlier you were talking about, if you're just tuning in, by the way, I'm speaking with Paul Feig. And earlier you were talking about working with Melissa McCarthy. A lot of your projects have been made with her. You're thinking about The Heat, Bridesmaids, Spy, Ghostbusters. What is it about her that makes you want to work with her so much?
Well, the funny thing is, she and I never set out like, okay, we're going to do our next movie together. Like, it just happens because I'll have this script, or be a character, or Katie Dippold was, for The Heat, she wrote a script and we were doing it. And it's just, as I'm going through it, go like, God, Melissa would be so good for this. We just have the same sense of humor, and we have the same
what do you
kind
mean?
There's a million different senses of humor. Some people like something really broad. Some people like something really subtle. Some people like something dirty. Whatever. We are united in the fact that we like very character-based comedy in which the characters are real, but they can be pushed to the extreme.
Right.
And so that you can have these absurd type things happening, but you never don't believe it. And we're very we guard each other on that. We're always testing each other on that of like, I don't know if they would do this. I don't know if they would do that. And sometimes we'll even try stuff, and then she knows enough to trust me enough that when we get in the editing room, I'm like, okay, that's too big. We're not going to believe it. Because I'm always trying to avoid that moment when an audience is sitting there and they go, oh, come on. Because then you lose the audience. And we see that happen in comedies all the time because they go like, well, we got this great joke. We got to keep this great joke. It's like, no, jettison the joke. If it hurts the reality and suddenly the audience goes like, well, why are they doing that? But it's a fine line you walk because if you set up a very extreme character, we have friends who are nuts. But they're real. They're not pretending to be nuts. And occasionally, if you have a friend who you go like, "You're pretending to be nuts," and nobody wants to hang around with them, So I just like that sort of extremeness in comedy.
It's funny that you mentioned though character-based, grounded in reality, but can be pushed to an extreme.
Yeah.
Not to be too on the nose here, but it very much describes why Melissa's been successful doing Sean Spicer, doing the
Totally.
White House press secretary.
Yeah.
What do you think it is about? As someone, as we said earlier, when you watch Saturday Night Live, you can see things a little bit differently. What is it about her and that sketch that's getting all this attention, that's making her knock it out of the park?
You know what? That's a kind of a different thing because that's parodying somebody. There you go. Like I could have said it.
Thanks a lot for coming in. We'll see you tomorrow.
Okay, it's great. Yeah. This is great, gang, everybody. No, that is the perfect example of. I've said this to Lauren, everybody. I said you hit the most cathartic comedy moment anybody could have hit ever because it was right when we were all just like feeling so powerless from this insanity that was going on with Trump and all this gang, and then that Spicer, ridiculous press conference. And so we were just kind of, everybody was like, what do we do? What do we do? We know something's crazy. And her coming out and doing that, you just felt the whole country go like, oh, yes, because it just was pointing to the absurdity so much and then taking it to the next level. And that is a different kind of comedy because then even though there is, you never don't believe that she is completely committed to being this person, but it just takes ridiculousness that they do and pushed it to the edge. And it was like this just collective breath of relief from the whole country when she did that.
But it's interesting to see some of the backlash. There were reports that within the White House, there were one of the larger issues was that the president had a problem with the fact that Sean Spicer was being portrayed by a woman.
Oh, yeah.
At all. And I know this is something that you faced throughout your career, obviously through the Ghostbusters backlash. Does that kind of vitriol, that kind of backlash surprise you anymore?
It sadly doesn't surprise me anymore, and I hate that it doesn't surprise me because when I started Ghostbusters, I went into that sort of like, look, I do these movies with these funny women and people really love them. And, even though you get on the press tour and it's always so women can be funny, which is,
I can't believe that's still a question.
Can't keep asking that question. But, I really went into, get that off your sheet.
Yeah, right.
But, so I went into Ghostbusters. I remember I sent that tweet out. I was so happy because I made this. I know how to do it because they wanted me to do a Ghostbusters stuff. I can do is all women. That'll be fun, and I know all these amazing women. So I put out this tweet like, I'm rebooting Ghostbusters, and it's gonna be all hilarious women. That's who I'm going to call, and just like, who's not going to be happy about this? And the first day, it was just like so happy and all these wonderful tweets. But then the next day, suddenly it trickled out through Breitbart and whoever else disseminates all this stuff, and so then you go, oh my God, and this wave of venom that came in was just unbelievable.
Yeah, because it wasn't like it wasn't just people saying that's a bad idea. It was people threatening. It was people encouraging violence. It was people saying, the worst things anyone can say to another human.
They were hoping that Katie Dippold and I were going to die. I mean, under a bus and taste our own blood. And, and look, yes, there were people that were just like, don't touch a classic, but there was also so much that was just very misogynistic. And, there's no getting around that. And that's when you suddenly go like, oh gosh, I thought we were way more advanced than this.
We have about a minute left. You're here for the Toronto Sketch Fest, and sketch comedy is fun, it's entertainment. But what you're seeing, as you said, with cathartic comedy, with Melissa McCarthy's portrayal of Sean Spicer, a lot of the sketches that are going up right now. I'm interested in ending. And what do you think sketch comedy's purpose is going forward? Like, why do you think we need sketch comedy to go on?
I mean, there's so many different reasons. I mean, obviously for political reasons, it's great to just kind of shine a light through that. But I just think, again, it's the perfect way to sort of comment on the human condition and everything we're going through. It is this distillation of absurdity that we face in our life, or just things that we're going through, and it's an illustration of it to go like, oh God, that's such a funny way to look at things I'm having an issue with or things I'm not happy with, and it's I mean, I think catharsis is a good term for comedy in general. It's very therapeutic if it's done right.
Paul Feig, thanks so much for coming in today.
Tom, thank you. You're the best.
It's been a pleasure, man.